Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and so today is the 30th anniversary of the day when a very frightened Chinese government sent in the army, including tanks, to murderously disrupt a peaceful and wholly unarmed protest by Chinese citizens who were calling for greater freedom of speech, amongst other things, in their country. And the most famous scene, shown behind me, from the event was from the day after, when a citizen, walking along with a couple of bags, took umbrage at a line of tanks and stood in its way. He eventually marched up to the lead tank, climbed on top of it to remonstrate with what must have been a very bemused tank commander. We don't know what happened to that man, but we can probably guess a Labour camp was involved. And so the freedoms that people won in other parts of Asia, including China's bugbear, Taiwan, which has led to more progressive societies, was denied the people of China. But in this video, I want to talk about the West's attitude towards this brutally oppressive event. I can't really say much from the Chinese perspective because that Chinese perspective is very hard to come by. But I was reading an article on it by the Chinese artist and political dissident Ai Weiwei, and in it he described the failure of the West over the suppression of information. Because it has to be said, it's not just that the Chinese government brutally murdered innocent citizens out of fear for their totalitarianism, but they wiped the event from the memory of the country. There is not permitted to be any serious discussion of the event, to the point where most people under the age of 30 now in that country must probably not even know that today is the anniversary of such an event. And I thought it might be that what Weiwei may have been doing was attacking Western democracies for cozying up to China and paying for trade agreements with our barely audible, pathetic protests at human rights violations. You know, in the same way that our government are currently humiliating us by fawning over Trump, a man who boasts about sexual violence against women and forcibly separating loving families at his borders. And all in return for a trade deal that will sell off what remains of the NHS, expose our population to food that kills Americans and would our own people, and forces us to favour goods produced in the US as opposed to the UK. But no, he was attacking the notion that was supposedly held by some Western democracies that as China became more wealthy, it would naturally become more democratic. So I guess the problem would go away without having to cause a diplomatic fuss. Now, I have to say, I've not actually heard that excuse given, but if it really was used, and I've no reason to deny it, then it may have been a more sinister motive, really. Now, Western countries do often make the mistake of thinking that a system that seems to work in one country will do so in another. In this vein, the US has tried to impose its form of democracy on any number of feudal states in the belief that the American system is great and, more importantly, universal. They just can't understand why their idea of government, which might well be, well supported and appreciated by their own people, wouldn't be lapped up by every other culture in the world. But buoyed by probably the single success they did have with post-war Japan, they keep doing it no matter how disastrously it goes wrong in every instance since. But I can't see a historical link to the correlation between increased wealth and increased democracy. If anything, it causes those who acquire the bulk of that wealth to double down on disenfranchising the population. Whether this is in the form of a traditional power grab, as happened in a number of Middle Eastern nations, or simply imposing a shill media to deceive the public into voting for politicians and policies that act against their own interests, such as happens in the UK and the US. It was noted today, for example, that both Theresa May and Donald Trump only took questions from Murdoch journalists at the press conference. So I can't believe that anyone in the West really believed that China would eventually sort itself out and see the benefits of democracy after the most appalling show of power at all costs of 30 years ago today. So I have to disagree with Weiwei here and wonder if maybe he believes that because it doesn't make sense that all these Western governments would allow the event to pass with so little criticism unless they thought good would eventually come of it. He's giving them too much credit as compassionate human beings. No, never underestimate how easily governments, even democratic ones, will turn a blind eye to the atrocities of business partners. The leaders of even democratic governments are not necessarily in favour of democracy themselves. They do not always wish to seek to impose the will of the people. They'll use the phrase a lot, not actually do it. Look at Donald Trump, occupying the positions that most Americans still like to call the leader of the free world, and yet The only world leaders he has ever expressed respect and admiration for are authoritarian ones. When it comes to the elected leaders of actual democracies, there isn't a single one that he hasn't attacked. But there may be, as I say, a more sinister motive behind not wanting China to push for democracy. Although there might not be evidence of greater wealth leading to greater democracy, the reverse can be true. An engaged society is certainly more productive. Humans are by nature capitalist. This is why parents reward their children for good behaviour and punish them for poor behaviour. We are genetically conditioned, like all intelligent animals, to develop our behaviours according to what leads to reward. And if people believe that hard work leads to greater rewards, well, most people will work hard. And the whole society is therefore more productive. But the problem with that is that the individuals do not always benefit from it. People who are very wealthy in a nation do not necessarily grow their wealth if the country as a whole becomes richer. In fact, they may lose it. A more enfranchised society will want the wealthiest to contribute to the infrastructure of the society that's benefiting them. They will want better distribution of wealth. So there are those who would rather the national cake remain small if it means retaining more control over it. And these people have a vested interest in promoting politicians who will let them have all that cake. Not that they ever seem to eat it. They just add it to the pile and go, cake. So if, as the leader of a democratic nation, Western nation, you know that you are suppressing the development of your own nation to protect a small number of wealthy benefactors, you would certainly not want to see a rival nation do well. And China could be a rival to all. It's huge, with massive natural resources and the greatest population on Earth. And we all need it. You ain't getting that new smartphone without China. Modern microelectronics uses rare earth metals that are not really found. Well, they're not found everywhere. In fact, they're not really found anywhere outside of China in great quantity. And wouldn't a more democratic China mean that people would demand higher living standards and wages to fund it all? That's what led to the protests in Tiananmen Square in the first place 30 years ago. Students who'd gone overseas and seen the living standards being denied to them in an increasingly corrupt state. But increased wages would drive up the price of those minerals that we all need. And if China's economy really took off, powered by a newly enfranchised people, it could become the dominant nation on Earth, easily overtaking the United States. It's only greedy capitalists in China, free to do as they please as long as they grease palms, that's holding it back. So no, I think there are many selfish reasons why Western democracies would be happy to turn a blind eye to Tiananmen Square, and I don't see it being explained by anything close to a belief in democracy being inevitable. So anyway, those are my thoughts to commemorate the event. Let me know yours in the comments below. I hope you found the video interesting, at least if you did. Don't forget to click the like button, subscribe for further content. Until next time, I'll see you later.